Seinfeld is a show about nothing, and yet it seems to cover practically everything. The same, at least the everything part, can be said about the Torah. Jewish wisdom teaches us hafochba v'hafochba decholaba. Turn it over and over and everything is in it. Our sages tell us that everything can be found within the wisdom of the Torah. And so, it is my pleasure to welcome you to Yada Yada Yiddish, where we explore Seinfeld episodes to mine them for the Torah wisdom that is inside. With the high holidays coming up, which is a time of introspection, a time of teshuvah, of returning to oneself, I've decided to focus our first episode on the episode of Seinfeld known as The Opposite. This was the final episode on season number 5. In this episode, George looks at his life and he comes to the realization that everything he's ever done has been wrong. And that's because he's always been going with his intuition, going with his gut. And so, as Jerry says,
every decision I've ever made in my entire life has been wrong. Every instinct I have in every aspect of life, be it something to wear, something to eat, it's all been wrong.
If every instinct you have is wrong, then the opposite would have to be right.
George decides from that moment on, starting from what he orders for lunch, at that moment when Jerry comes up with the suggestion, that he is going to do the opposite of every instinct he has. And it works. From that moment on, everything in George's life turns around. He lands his dream job with the New York Yankees. He finally moves out of his parents' apartment. Everything is going great for George. At the same time, everything in Elaine's life seems to be spiraling downward. At the beginning of the episode, she is riding high and everything's great. And as we get to the end of the episode, everything in her life begins to unravel and fall apart. And Jerry, no matter what happens, stays exactly the same. Let's break down this episode. As we approach the high holidays, it's a time of self-growth and introspection. But a person can only go through that process when I'm aware of what's going on around me, when I'm aware of who I am as a person. So often, we go through life on autopilot. We don't ever stop to think about who we are and where we're going. The theme of this episode goes to the core of what it means to be human. Years ago, I was giving a class, and I was talking about the idea of free choice and the distinction between man and animal. And I gave a theoretical example, and to try to illustrate the fact that we all intuitively understand that people are different from animals. And I said, imagine you're walking along the beach and you see equidistant from you a stranger that you don't know, that you've never met before, who's drowning, and your dog that you've had for 15 years, your childhood dog, the dog that you love more than anything, and you can only save one. Which do you save? And there was a guy in the class, let's call him John, because his name was John. And he says, he actually argued that he would save the dog, because it's your dog after all. Now that was a surprise, but I think most of us would agree that we intuitively understand a distinction between man and animal. And I hope that most of us would save the human, even though he's a stranger, over our beloved dog. In any event, people and animals are different. There's a professor at Loyola University, my alma mater, who wanted to argue that animals should be given the same rights as humans. Because after all, what makes animals different? Is it intellect? There are highly intelligent animals, like dolphins, for example. Is it our ability to communicate? There are many different types of apes that not only communicate through language, they communicate through sign language as well. So it's not communication. It's not intellect. Well, what is it? What makes human beings different from animals? In order to understand this, we have to go all the way back to the Garden of Eden. And as we do so, we'll realize that we are in the garden almost every single day. God creates the whole world. He creates mankind, and he places him in the Garden of Eden. He gives them a commandment, and all of the sudden, there is trouble in paradise. God says not to eat from the tree, and Adam is like, okay, I won't eat from the tree. What's the big deal? God says not to do it, I won't do it. Man is not tempted. If man is not tempted, we're in trouble. Because with no temptation, there's no reward, no purpose to the whole universe. So you know what God does? He creates Eve to help get man into trouble. Not that Eve was more fickle or more easy to convince, but Eve had not heard the command directly from God. Eve heard it through Adam. Eve heard it through a second party. So she would be more easily able to be convinced to eat from the tree. How does it happen? The snake approaches Eve, and we're told that the snake is the most cunning of all the animals in the garden. And the Torah, the Bible, records the argument that the snake makes. The snake says to Eve, Af ki amar Elokim lo soflo, even if God said not to eat from the trees of the garden, and that's it. You'd expect there to be more. You'd go, well, where's the end of the sentence? And because of that, many of the translators, many of the commentators add the word so what to the end. Meaning, even if God said not to eat from the trees of the garden, why listen to God? Listen to me. Now, other than the fact that's a really bad argument, especially coming from the most cunning of all the animals in the garden, it's also not what the verse says. The snake's argument, if you look at the verse by itself, isn't even a full sentence. If you type that into Microsoft Word, you'd get the little green squiggly line underneath. It's not a full sentence. Even if God said not to eat from all the trees of the garden, where's the end? Rabbi Samson Raphael Hirsch says the emphasis needs to be on the word said. He explains the story a little differently. The snake finds Eve when she's by herself, and he approaches her and he says, do you see the tree of good and evil? Do you want to eat from it? And Eve says, well, God said I'm not allowed to. And the snake says, what? God tells you what to do? How strange. He doesn't tell me what to do. I just follow my instincts. I do what I feel like doing. Oh, well, you must be some lower life form or something. He says, wait a second. Do you want to eat from the tree? Eve says, I guess. Do you see its fruits? Don't they look good? And she says, yeah. Don't you desire to eat from them? And Eve says, yes, absolutely. So the snake says, you see, you and I are exactly the same. The same way God speaks to me by giving me an instinct, he speaks to you in the same way. Af ki amar Elohim lo sochlu. Even if God said not to eat from the tree, why listen to what God said when you can listen to what God said? Don't listen to the voice of God from the outside. Listen to the enlightened voice of God from inside. And the truth is, the snake was 100% correct if you're a snake. And that is where Eve made the mistake, because she is not the same as a snake. Every time a fish swims upstream, every time a bird flies south for the winter, it is following the will of God. It is doing what it's meant to do by following its instinct. But human beings are not animals. Yes, we can easily just follow our instincts, but that's not what it means to use the human faculties that we've been given. A human being is different from an animal in the fact that we have free will. We have the ability to make real choices, to not just do what we feel like doing, but to do what we know is the right thing. It reminds me of a story. There were two old ladies, Daisy and Sally, and they had been best friends for 70 years. One day, Daisy picks up Sally and they're going to go to the mall. Sally's sitting there in the passenger seat. She puts on her seatbelt and they're driving. All of a sudden, they cruise straight through a red light. Sally's about to say something to Daisy, but she figures maybe I was just imagining it. I don't know. So this time she is paying attention. And she's paying attention and they run through another red light. And she knows for sure this time they ran through a red light. So Sally turns to Daisy and she says, Daisy, you just ran through a red light. What are you doing? And Daisy said, "Wait, was I driving?" We go through life on autopilot, and often we don't even understand or realize that we are in the driver's seat, that we're behind the wheel, that this is our lives. Now, I'm not suggesting that we take George's advice. It's a little extreme. I'm not saying do the opposite of every instinct that you have. Often, our instincts are there to guide us. Often, our instincts are correct. But we shouldn't just go with the flow. We need to be willing to take control of our own lives. We are human becomings, not just human beings. We have the ability to get greater, stronger, and better. It's very easy to adopt the attitude of, listen, this is who I am. I'm X years old. I've been around this long. I'm not going to change. This is who I am. Take it or leave it. That attitude might make us feel good inside, but that's not going to help us become the people we're meant to be. Real growth happens when I'm willing to take control of my own life. When I'm willing to acknowledge that just because this is who I am right now, doesn't mean this is who I'm meant to be. I can grow and I can change. That change happens when I'm willing to take control of my own life. When I'm willing to say, this is not just who I am. I know that I can become someone different. I can become someone better. In the Jewish calendar, the New Year, Rosh Hashanah, comes before Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement. And pretty much everyone asks the question that the days seem out of order. Surely we should first have the Day of Atonement. We should say we're sorry for all the things that we've done. We should get rid of all the baggage from the past. And then we can begin Rosh Hashanah. We can begin the year with a fresh, clean slate. Why don't we have Yom Kippur first and then Rosh Hashanah? To answer that question, imagine, if you will, an alcoholic. A person who has let down his wife and his children time and time again. And he comes to his wife, who's on the verge of leaving him, and he says, "Please accept my sincere apology. I'm sorry for what I've done. I'm sorry for the way that I've ruined our lives. Please take me back." What are the chances that she's going to listen? What if instead he checks into a program? He begins taking the steps to become better, to heal himself. And then he comes to his wife with a sincere apology. That's a completely different game. And so before we have Yom Kippur, we start with Rosh Hashanah. We start not just with a clean slate, but we start with a day that I can imagine what my new life is going to look like, what my new year is going to look like. I come up with a plan of the steps that I'm going to take to get to that place. And only once I have that plan in place, only once I've taken those steps towards becoming the better version of myself, do I then go through the Yom Kippur. Do I go through the process of trying to fix all the mistakes that I've made. But before I can repair those things, I have to begin with the commitment. I need to take those steps towards becoming that better person. Only then will my apology be sincere. The attitude of I am what I am and I'm not going to change, this is who I am, is so antithetical to Judaism. Judaism is all about developing a growth mindset. It's about an awareness that I can constantly grow, I can constantly change. I am not set to be the person I am right now forever. I am meant to change, I'm meant to grow. Just like George, we have to go through life consciously, not just going with our instincts, but being willing to make real choices, real decisions, being aware of the life that we lead, the life that we live, to live a life more mindfully. So much of Judaism is about being more mindful. Before we eat, we make a blessing. And part of that is forcing ourselves to have this awareness. I'm about to eat this apple. Do I want to eat the apple? Or am I just throwing food into my face because I'm bored and I'm not thinking about it? I can't just do things on autopilot. I need to take that step, that pause, to understand and ask myself, do I want to be doing the thing that I'm doing right now? Is it in line with my values? Is it going to bring me to a higher state of awareness? Is it going to help me become the person I'm meant to be? There's another message that we get from this week's episode. At the beginning of the episode, everything seems to be going wrong for George. And as the episode progresses, George's life goes straight up. Elaine's, on the other hand, is exactly the opposite. It starts off on top and then it nosedives as everything that could possibly go wrong does. Jerry, on the other hand, stays completely straight. Even Stephen. He even points this out to Elaine. He explains how everything in his life just seems to go well. When something goes wrong, it automatically snaps back to get right to the middle line where it's supposed to be. There's this hysterical scene where he's explaining this to Elaine, and she wants to prove whether or not it's true, so she takes the $20 bill from Jerry and she throws it out the window. Just minutes later, George comes into the apartment, and he's holding a $20 bill that was obviously the one that Elaine threw out the window. And it just goes to show how everything seems to go right for George, everything seems to go wrong for Elaine, and Jerry, as he's walking out of the apartment, goes into his pocket and pulls out a $20 bill. Everything just stays exactly where it's supposed to. What that reminded me of is the fact that no matter how much we do put in our effort, and we have to, we can't just go with the flow, we can't just assume that everything will just work out. We need to make choices. We need to put in the effort, and we need to roll up our sleeves and get to work. But at the same time, we have to understand that ultimately, the outcome is out of our hands. That's a really important foundational Jewish concept, is ultimately the outcome is up to the Almighty, it's up to God. The Hebrew word for an ordeal is a nisayon. The root of that word is the word nes, which means a miracle, which begs the question, what's miraculous about an ordeal? If I'm faced with a challenge, I'm faced with a test, and I make it to the other side, what was miraculous about that? If I'm able to accomplish whatever the task is, so then God knows I'm going to do it, why does he need to even test me? And if I'm not able to do it, so then I wouldn't have done it. Where is the miraculous nature here? But the idea is as follows. Every single challenge, every ordeal, if it's truly an ordeal, is something I cannot do on my own. And that's where the miraculous comes in. My job is to do my utmost, to put in the effort, to take that leap. And even though I can't really make it to the other side on my own, if I put in the effort, I do all that I can, God takes me to the other side. And that's how I succeed in any challenge that comes my way. That is a nisayon. That is a nes. There was a mother who was trying to encourage her young child to play piano. So she took him to see the great Paderewski. And before the show starts, she sees a friend she hadn't seen in some time. And the two ladies begin talking, as women often do, or at least mothers often do. And before they know it, the lights go out and it's time for the show. Everyone hurries back to their seat, and she looks down and her son Jack is gone. And she is terrified. She begins looking everywhere she can, but she can't find her son. Until, in just a moment, that pit in her stomach of fear and anxiety turns into embarrassment. She is mortified because her son, who had never been in a concert hall before, began to explore, and he found his way onto the stage. The spotlight is on this little boy as he begins to walk towards the grand piano. He sits at the keys, and he begins to pound, making so much noise. Meanwhile, Paderewski walks out, and everyone is sitting completely silent with bated breath, trying to see what the great pianist is going to do. He walks over to the boy, and he whispers in his ear, "Don't stop playing." And he puts his left hand to the left of the boy, his right hand to the right of the boy, and he begins to play all around him. The people there that night say they heard the most magnificent music ever. Paderewski had transformed the boy's noise into the most magnificent music. And the same is true in our lives. We go through life and we put in the effort, and the reality is we're just pounding at the keys, we're making noise. But God says, don't stop playing. You put in your effort and I'll do the rest. That's such a freeing way to look at life. There are so many times that we put in so much effort and we think it's for nothing. and we think it's not going anywhere, and we rip our hair out trying to figure out how we can do more and more and more. But ultimately, Judaism teaches us that if I've already done what I'm supposed to do, I've done the responsible amount, now it's time to stop the worrying, to stop putting in any more effort, and to recognize that now it's out of my hands and it's in God's hands. And there's nothing more freeing than that. Nothing more freeing than knowing that ultimately the outcome is out of my hands. There's a great expression I picked up from a friend of mine named Mendel. Not my circus, not my monkeys. That is something I've since started to live by. Not my circus, not my monkeys. It's just not something that I'm capable of doing right now. It's not something that I need to do right now. I've already done my best. I've put in all the effort I can, and whatever happens next is not my problem. So when I look at the three characters, I look at Elaine, I look at George, I look at Jerry, they are spinning their wheels, they're doing all of these different efforts, but ultimately, what happens is outside of their hands. So let's remember, we can't just sit back and say it'll all just happen. On the flip side, we can't think that our actions are what actually lead to the outcome. When I put those two things together, I have a holistic approach where I work hard. I acknowledge that I'm not just the way I am, but I'm a human becoming not just a human being, that I can constantly grow, I can constantly change, and I'm not bound to be the same person I am right now forever. I can grow, I can change, but ultimately, after I put in the effort, the outcome is outside of my hands. So thank you so much for joining us. We hope to see you back here next month for episode 2. If you have suggestions of episodes that you want to see us tackle, just email me at yada, Y-A-D-A, @lairfield.com. I hope to hear from you guys soon. And until then, have a great day. Bye.